Hello, my name is Tamal Pilla with the Center for Presidential History at SMU, joined today by Miss Jean Becker. Miss Becker is the author of New York Times best-selling book, The Man I Knew, The Amazing Story of George H.W. Bush's Post-Presidency. And in fact, next month on November 19th, she's going to come to SMU to discuss her new book, Character Matters, and the other life lessons from George H.W. Bush. Miss Becker, thank you so much for joining me.
I'm thrilled to be here, Tamal. I can't wait to come see you in Dallas. I'll be
Yes,
there
ma'am. I'm
before you
excited
know
as
it.
well. So in the book itself, right, in the author's note, you mentioned that the book is not necessarily intended to be, a historical account
Right.
of H.W. Bush's life or his presidency, but about leadership and humility and courage, of course, his character. Why is that important for us as students of presidential history? I know we talked about this a little bit beforehand. Why do we care about the presidential character in this day and age?
I think we care about presidential character more than ever, or we should be caring about it more than ever. As you know, our politics are sort of going through a complicated time right now where there's a lot I use the word tumultuous, a lot of arguing, a lot of name calling, a lot of vitriol. We no longer debate the issues, we just yell at each other. So I think I've been doing a lot of talking about this subject, and people are sort of worried about our democracy. And I said, one of the solutions here is to take a step back and just to sort of look at our history, to look at our presidential history in particular, and to study how our different presidents handled the different times in our history. And what comes out to Maul is what a big issue character was, starting with George Washington. In order to be president, in order to be the free leader of the free world, you have to have purpose. You have to have passion. You have to care about our country and the world. And that takes character.
So why is it important for students of presidential history to humanize our presidents, to not put them on this pedestal and kind of understand them as one of our own, as a citizen above
Yeah,
everything else?
it's a great question, Tamal. Nobody's perfect. Show me a perfect person and I will show you a good actor. Everybody has faults. Everybody has imperfections, but what you want in your leader is for the good in them, the wisdom in them to be stronger and better than whatever their weaknesses are. And I think for the most part in our presidential history, we've been lucky to have people like Abraham Lincoln, to have people like Franklin Roosevelt. I just wrote a book about Dwight Eisenhower. Oh my gosh, I learned a lot. But one of the more controversial presidents these days is one of our founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson. He owned slaves. And I have been involved in a number of really fascinating conversations. George Washington owned slaves, about our founding fathers and the issue of slavery. And again, I think those of you, I love that you're studying presidential history. It's a complicated issue, but do you dismiss Thomas Jefferson because he owned slaves? You do not. You do not. Was he wrong? Of course he was. But again, I think we need to study history, we need to understand history, and then we need to look for the best in everybody. And that's what we need to do in electing our current leaders, to look for the best in them and to look to see what they want to do for our country.
What inspired you to write this book? I know I've heard you in previous interviews talk about your editor bringing up this
It
idea
was
of writing
his.
a second book after writing, The Man I Knew, right? Which ends with, President H.W. Bush's death. And so the natural question is, where do I go from here? So what was that ideation process like? How do you come up with this new thesis about H.W.'s presidencies?
Well, I would love to say this book was my idea because it was a brilliant idea, and the timing of the book could not have been more interesting. It's truly serendipitous, I think, that the book came out at this time in our country. And I think the book has actually brought a lot of peace and hope to a lot of people. But anyway, I was having lunch with my editor in New York, and I had a couple of book ideas that I was suggesting to him. And one of them he liked, I'm actually working on now. But he's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. But I have another book I want you to write first. And he said, I don't think we're done with George H.W. Bush. And that's when I said to him, you do remember that he died at the end of the last book. I couldn't see where he was going with this. But Sean, my editor's name is Sean Desmond, and he just felt there was so much in the man I knew that Sean felt were just great life lessons. I think I made the point in the man I knew that in some ways President Bush left us a blueprint on how to live a life well lived. And Sean wanted me to expand on that. So what I did, I had to sleep on it. The light bulb hadn't come on yet. And then it was like the spotlight came on. And what I did is I reached out to people who knew him best. And it was everybody from some of his head of state peers, former Prime Minister John Major and Brian Mulroney of Canada, John Major of Great Britain. They have essays in the book. His good friend, President Clinton, former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, a lot of his former staff. Secretary James Becker wrote the foreword. Vice President Dan Quayle wrote the epilogue. But in between, there's people like Dana Carvey and Reba McEntire, and the young man who mowed the yard at Walker's Point, who, by the way, is now George W. Bush's personal aide. You might see him on campus, Dante. So it's everybody in his life you can think of, from heads of state to the yard lad at Walker's Point. And it was just interesting. I did a call out for essays. I was hoping to get maybe 50 to 70. There's 154 essays in the book.
Wow.
My inbox just started filling up. And
Yeah.
some of the stories are funny, some are very touching, some are definitely enlightening, but everybody, their assignment was, what did you learn from him? And some of them do it by just talking about him. Some have a story to tell. It was a lot of fun to put this book together.
With elections coming up, the question I would ask is, who do you think is the most relevant audience now for the book? Now that it's published, now that it's written, has your target audience changed at all? Who do you think is best suited and the most benefited from reading this book as we move into election season?
I've been doing interviews about this book since April, Tamal, and no one has asked me that question. That is a great question. I'm not sure. I think my target audience in the beginning was everybody. I hate to be boring, but I think everybody. Now it's people your age. It's young people. Because you all are our future leaders. That's who I was speaking to at Texas A&M last night. You all are our future leaders, and I'm so happy that I've written this book that gives an example of how things used to be and how they should be and how they can be. And I've had a lot of young people come and talk to me about the book, that they were just really inspired about some of the essays in the book, and inspired by some of the decisions President Bush made. I'll definitely be talking at SMU about the 1990 budget deal, in which President Bush compromised with the Democrats on the budget to get a balanced budget. And he literally wrote in his diary the day that he decided he was going to accept this compromise, that he probably just made himself a one-term president. And that diary entry is just blowing young people away. They love seeing that he made a decision that he knew would maybe cost him the election. And it did. He was right. It did cost him the election. So my target audience now is for young people, for young professionals, college students, speaking to 500 high school students here in Houston next week, who are looking for mentors, looking for inspiration, looking for people they can learn from on how life is meant to be lived and what leadership means.
Yeah, 100%. And the last question I have for you, Ms. Becker, is actually pretty similar now that you've answered that. But I love to ask it to all of my interviewees because I think it's very relevant to not just me, but also a lot of my friends at SMU, because we do have more than just the history department. We have engineers and we have artists and we have students of finance. And so the question I'm asking is to those kids who might not have anything going on the
Mhm.
evening of November 19th, who want to kill some time, but they study music or they study mechanical engineering or they study supply chain analytics, right? Who on the surface shouldn't have any real interest in presidential history, but they don't have anything else to do. Why should they come out to your event and sit down, pay attention, engage? Why should people my age, who are just interested in such different things, be interested in the character of the presidency?
Because no matter who you are in life or what your job is or where you come from, how you live your life is important. How you treat other people is important. How you approach responsibility and accept responsibility. And I think everybody, every student on campus will be inspired by President Bush and how he approached his life, how he lived his life. And I promise that some of the stories will make you laugh a lot. There's one story in particular that everybody will love. That's all I'm going to say. You have to come to hear it. It's one of my favorite stories and everyone loves it. But I even may make a few people cry. It's sort of for lack of a better word, sort of a smorgasbord of stories about, again, a life well lived and a man who loved his country, who, when he was 20 years old, was shot down in World War II. And the huge impact I think his being shot down had on the rest of his life, which again makes his story so relevant to all of you, Tamal. He was your age when he was in World War II. And so I think it's a fascinating journey. So I invite all SMU students, come take the journey with me. I promise it'll be an interesting and a fun ride.
And to our viewers listening who've made it this long, please come out November 19th, McCord Auditorium, 6 p.m. as usual, to see Miss Becker speak on her new book, and join us in being together and talking about this presidency. So thank you, Miss Becker.
Thank you. And I'll see everybody November 19th.